The wind cut through me like 1,000 frozen blades. I stood at the edge of what they called the end of the world, a place where the temperature dropped so low that a cup of boiling water would turn to ice before it hit the ground. Fairbanks, Alaska, January. -85 degrees with the wind chill. And somewhere in this frozen wasteland, a man named Viktor Kozlov had built something that defied all logic, all reason, and every law of nature and man. I remember the exact moment I first heard his name. I was sitting in my tiny apartment in Seattle, surrounded by unpaid medical bills and the cold reality that my mother's treatment had drained every last penny I had. The phone rang. A voice I did not recognize spoke 3 sentences that would change my life forever. Your skills are needed. The pay is $200,000 for 6 months of work. A car will pick you up tomorrow morning. I should have hung up. I should have called the police. I should have done anything. Except what I actually did, which was to pack a small bag and wait by the window like a child waiting for Christmas morning. But desperation has a way of silencing the voice of reason. And I was desperate. My mother needed her surgery. The hospital had made it very clear that without the money they would not proceed. Time was not on our side. The car arrived at 6 in the morning, a black SUV with tinted windows that seemed to absorb the grey Seattle light rather than reflect it. The driver said nothing. He did not even look at me. He simply opened the rear door and waited. I climbed in, clutching my bag to my chest like a shield, and we drove north. For hours we drove north, past the Canadian border, through endless forests of pine and spruce, until the trees themselves began to thin and the world turned white. My name is Elena Vargas. I am 29 years old. I have a degree in mechanical engineering from MIT and a specialization in extreme cold weather systems. For the past 5 years, I had been working for a research company that designed heating systems for Arctic drilling platforms. It was good work, meaningful work, but it paid a modest salary that could not keep pace with the cost of keeping my mother alive. Cancer, the doctors had said. Aggressive. Treatable, but only with the right resources. The SUV stopped at a small airfield somewhere in the Yukon. A private plane waited on the tarmac, its engines already running, white vapor streaming from its exhaust, like the breath of some great mechanical beast. The pilot was a woman with silver hair and eyes the color of glacier ice. She looked at me once, nodded, and gestured toward the cabin. "Welcome to the first day of your new life," she said. "I hope you brought warm clothes." I had. 3 layers of thermal underwear, a down jacket rated to -40, and boots that had cost me a month's salary. I had done my research. I knew where I was going, at least geographically. What I did not know, what I could not possibly have known, was what awaited me at the end of this journey. The flight took 4 hours. We flew over landscapes that looked like the surface of another planet, white and blue and impossibly vast. Rivers of ice wound through valleys that had never known human footsteps. Mountains rose like the teeth of ancient giants, their peaks lost in clouds that seemed to be made of frozen crystals rather than water vapor. I pressed my face to the window like a child, unable to look away from the terrible beauty of it all. And then, just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that I had never seen before, the pilot's voice came through the intercom. "There it is," she said. "Kozlov's Folly. That is what they call it. Though I have been flying supplies here for 3 years, and I can tell you there is nothing foolish about it." I looked down, and I saw it. A compound, massive and sprawling, carved into the side of a mountain. Buildings of steel and glass that should not have been possible in this climate. Lights that blazed against the coming darkness like a beacon of human defiance. Steam rose from vents scattered across the complex, creating a halo of warmth that was visible even from this altitude. It was like looking at a city on Mars, a human settlement in a place where humans were never meant to survive. The plane touched down on a runway that had been carved from the ice itself. Men in heavy parkas rushed forward to secure the aircraft, their movements efficient and practiced. They did not speak. They did not smile. They simply did their jobs with a precision that spoke of long training and absolute discipline. A figure emerged from one of the buildings. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the wind. He wore a simple black coat that seemed wholly inadequate for the temperature, yet he moved as if the cold did not touch him. His hair was dark, peppered with grey at the temples, and his eyes were the colour of the winter sky just before a storm. He walked toward the plane with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed, because he did. Viktor Koslov stopped 3 feet from where I stood, shivering despite all my layers. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was like the rumble of distant thunder, deep and resonant and impossible to ignore. "Miss Vargas," he said, "welcome to the Ice Empire. I have heard you are the best at what you do. I hope for both our sakes that this is true. I wanted to respond with something clever, something that would establish me as a professional who was not intimidated by extreme cold or powerful men, but my teeth were chattering too violently to form words. I managed a nod which seemed to amuse him. He almost smiled. Almost. "Come," he said, "let me show you what you will be working on, and then, if you still want to run back to your comfortable life in Seattle, I will have someone drive you to the airport myself." I followed him through the compound, and with each step my amazement grew. The buildings were connected by enclosed walkways, heated corridors that allowed movement between structures without exposure to the killing cold outside. Inside, the temperature was a comfortable 65 degrees. There were workshops and laboratories, living quarters and dining halls. There was even a small greenhouse where vegetables grew under artificial lights, a miracle of engineering that provided fresh food to the hundreds of people who lived and worked here. Victor explained as we walked. "This place was nothing 10 years ago," he said. "Just a claim on paper, a piece of land that no one wanted. I bought it for less than the price of a used car. And then I built. First 1 building, then 2, then 10. Now we have a community, a purpose." "What purpose?" I asked, finally finding my voice. "What are you doing out here in the middle of nowhere?" He stopped walking. He turned to face me, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes that was not cold calculation. It was passion. It was belief. "We are mining," he said, "but not for gold or oil or any of the usual things that bring men to the Arctic. We are mining for something far more valuable. Ice." I must have looked confused because he laughed. It was a warm sound, unexpected in this frozen place. "Not ordinary ice," he continued. "Ancient ice. Ice that has been frozen for millions of years, trapped deep in the permafrost. Ice that contains something the world will soon need more than anything else. Clean water. Pure, uncontaminated water from a time before pollution, before industry, before everything that has poisoned our planet." He led me to the heart of the operation, a massive underground chamber that had been carved from the frozen earth. Here, enormous machines worked day and night, extracting cores of ancient ice and processing them with technology that I had never seen before. The ice glowed with an otherworldly blue light, more beautiful than any jewel. "The world is running out of clean water," Victor said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Aquifers are being depleted. Rivers are drying up. Wars will be fought over water within our lifetime. But here, beneath our feet, lies enough pure water to supply entire nations for centuries, and I am going to be the one who brings it to them." I understood then why he needed an engineer with my specific skills. The extraction process required heating systems that could operate in extreme cold, pumps that would not freeze, and pipelines that could transport liquid water through an environment that turned everything to ice in seconds. It was a technical challenge unlike anything I had ever faced. It was also, I realized with growing excitement, exactly the kind of problem I had spent my entire career preparing to solve. Victor watched my face as the understanding dawned. "Will you stay?" he asked. "Will you help me build something that matters?" I thought of my mother waiting for her surgery. I thought of the mountain of debt that was slowly crushing me. I thought of the $200,000 that would solve all of my immediate problems. But more than that, I thought of the work itself, the challenge, the possibility of being part of something genuinely important. "Yes," I said. "I will stay." Victor nodded, as if he had expected no other answer. "Good," he said. "Then let me introduce you to your team. And to the one rule that must never be broken here. This place, this operation, does not exist. As far as the outside world is concerned, you are on a research expedition studying climate change. That is what you will tell your family, your friends, anyone who asks. The truth of what we do here remains within these walls. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to know why such secrecy was necessary for what seemed like a legitimate, even noble enterprise. But the cold had numbed, more than my fingers. It had numbed my caution, and so I nodded, and I followed him deeper into the ice empire, not knowing that I had just signed away far more than 6 months of my life. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. These stories are about real human struggles, real emotions, and the extraordinary things ordinary people do when pushed to their limits. If that is what keeps you coming back, hit that subscribe button now and join a community that believes in the power of storytelling. The first month passed in a blur of work and wonder. I was assigned a small team of engineers, all of them brilliant, all of them recruited under similarly mysterious circumstances. There was Marcus, a hydraulics expert from Norway, who had been building water systems in remote villages before Victor found him. There was Yuki, a Japanese thermal engineer who had worked on geothermal plants in Iceland. And there was David, an American like me, a pipeline specialist who had spent years in the oil fields of Alaska before growing disillusioned with the environmental destruction he was being asked to facilitate. We worked 16-hour days, sometimes longer. The problems we faced were immense. How do you pump water through a pipe when the outside temperature is cold enough to freeze it solid in minutes? How do you maintain the massive heating systems that kept the compound habitable when the nearest spare parts were thousands of miles away? How do you keep hundreds of workers fed, housed, and healthy in a place where the sun disappeared for months at a time? But slowly, steadily, we found solutions. We designed triple-walled pipes with heated cores. We built redundant heating systems that could run on multiple fuel sources. We created a maintenance protocol that anticipated problems before they became emergencies. And with each success, my respect for Victor grew. He was not like any boss I had ever had. He knew every aspect of the operation, from the geology, of the ice formations to the engineering of the extraction equipment, to the logistics of shipping the finished product to markets around the world. He worked as hard as any of his employees, often harder. I would find him in the workshops at 3 in the morning, going over designs, asking questions, pushing for improvements. And yet there was always something he was not telling me. I saw it in the way certain areas of the compound were off limits, marked with warning signs in Russian that no one would translate for me. I saw it in the way some of the workers watched me, their eyes calculating as if assessing whether I could be trusted. I saw it in the armed guards who patrolled the perimeter, their weapons far more sophisticated than anything required to protect a water mining operation from polar bears. One night, about 6 weeks after my arrival, I could not sleep. My mind was racing with ideas for improving the primary extraction pump, and I knew from experience that the only way to quiet my thoughts was to go to the workshop and sketch them out. I bundled up and made my way through the heated corridors, my footsteps echoing in the empty passageways. That was when I heard the voices. They came from behind a door marked "No Entry" in 3 languages. The door was slightly ajar, and light spilled through the crack. I knew I should turn around. I knew I should mind my own business and go back to my quarters. But curiosity is a powerful force, and I had been curious about Viktor Kozlov since the moment I first heard his name. I crept closer. Through the crack I could see a large room filled with equipment I did not recognize. Victor stood in the center, surrounded by a dozen men in suits that seemed wildly out of place in this frozen outpost. They were speaking in rapid Russian, their voices urgent, sometimes angry. I could not understand the words, but I understood the tone. This was a negotiation, and it was not going well. One of the men stepped forward, his face red with anger. He jabbed a finger at Victor's chest, shouting something that sounded like an accusation. Victor did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached out, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted. I heard the crack from where I stood. The man screamed and fell to his knees. Victor said something quietly, almost gently. The other men in suits went pale. They stepped back, their earlier bravado evaporating like mist in the sun. One by one, they nodded, their heads bobbing, like marionettes. Then Victor released the man's wrist and gestured toward the door. The meeting was over. I ran back to my quarters as fast as I could, my heart pounding, my breath coming in gasps that frosted the air around me. I did not stop until I was inside my room with the door locked behind me. I stood there in the darkness, trembling, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Viktor Kozlov was not just a visionary entrepreneur with a dream of saving the world through ancient water. Viktor Kozlov was something else entirely. The way he had handled that man, the casual efficiency of the violence, the utter lack of emotion in his eyes. I had seen that look before, in documentaries about organized crime, in news footage of powerful men who operated outside the law. Viktor Kozlov was a mafia boss, and I was working for him, living in his compound, thousands of miles from anyone who could help me. The next morning, I went to work as usual. What else could I do? I was trapped in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness, with no way out and no one to call. My phone had no signal here. Communications with the outside world went through a central hub that was almost certainly monitored. Even if I could reach someone, what would I say? I'm working for a water company that might be a criminal organization. I saw a man get his wrist broken. It sounded ridiculous even in my own head, so I worked. I kept my head down, focused on my engineering problems, and tried not to think about what I had seen, but Victor made that impossible. He sought me out that very afternoon, appearing in my workshop with his characteristic silence, standing in the doorway until I looked up from my calculations. "Miss Vargas," he said, "I understand you had trouble sleeping last night. My blood turned to ice, colder than the air outside, colder than the ancient water we were mining." He knew. Of course he knew. A man like Victor would have surveillance everywhere. I had been foolish to think otherwise. I started to stammer an apology, an explanation, a lie that might somehow save me. But he held up a hand, stopping me mid-word. "Walk with me," he said. "There are things you need to understand." We walked outside, into the brutal cold. Victor led me to the edge of the compound, where the buildings gave way to nothing but ice and sky. The sun hung low on the horizon, a pale disk that provided light, but no warmth. The wind had died down, and the silence was so profound that I could hear my own heartbeat. 10 years ago, Victor began, I was a different man. I ran a network that stretched across 3 continents. Weapons, contraband, things that I will not name. I was very successful, and I was very ruthless. I built an empire on fear and violence, and I told myself it was necessary, that it was just business, that the world was cruel, and I was simply adapting to its cruelty. He paused, staring out at the frozen wasteland. Then one winter, I came here. I was hiding from enemies who wanted me gone. I had nowhere else to go, so I came to this place that no one wanted, this land at the edge of the world. And something changed in me. I looked at this ice, this ancient ice that had been here since before humans existed, and I realized that everything I had built, all my power and wealth, was nothing, less than nothing. A brief flicker that would be forgotten the moment I was gone. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. I just listened, my breath forming. Clouds that hung in the still air. I decided to start over, Victor continued, to build something that mattered, something that would last. This operation, the water, the technology we are developing, it is real. It is legitimate. But the people I used to work with, they do not let go easily. They still come to me asking for favors, demanding tribute, threatening consequences if I do not comply. The men you saw last night were reminders of a past I am trying to escape. He turned to face me, and his eyes were no longer cold. They were tired, sad, haunted by memories I could only imagine. "I am telling you this because you deserve to know the truth," he said. "You are brilliant, Miss Vargas. Your work here has exceeded all my expectations, but you are also trapped in the middle of a situation that is far more complicated than you signed up for. So I am giving you a choice. You can leave tomorrow. I will pay you what I promised, and you will never speak of this place again. Or you can stay, knowing what you now know, and help me finish what I started. I thought about my mother. I thought about the surgery she needed. I thought about the $200,000 that would save her life. And then I thought about something else. I thought about the work itself, the clean water that could help millions of people, the technical challenges that made my engineer's heart sing, the chance to be part of something bigger than myself. I will stay, I said, but I have conditions. Victor raised an eyebrow. Conditions? I want access. Full access to everything. No more locked doors and off-limits areas. If I am going to trust you, I need to understand what I am trusting. And I want your word that whatever happens with your old associates, it will not endanger the people who work here. These are good people, scientists and engineers who believe in what we are doing. They do not deserve to be caught in the crossfire of your past. Victor was silent for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying crystals of ice that stung my exposed cheeks. Then slowly he nodded. You have my word, he said. Full access and full protection for everyone here. You are braver than I expected, Miss Vargas. Perhaps I made a better choice in recruiting you than I knew. We walked back to the compound in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of secrets and suspicion, but the silence of understanding. I still did not fully trust Victor Kozlov. I was not foolish enough to believe that a man could simply walk away from the world he had described. But I believed in the work we were doing, and I believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that people could change, that redemption was possible, even for men who had done terrible things. The weeks that followed were different. True to his word, Victor gave me access to every part of the compound. I learned that the off-limits areas contain not criminal enterprises, but security systems, contingency plans, and stockpiles of supplies meant to ensure the survival of everyone here if the outside world ever turned against us. I learned that the armed guards were former soldiers, men Victor had recruited not for their capacity for violence, but for their loyalty and discipline. I learned that beneath the cold exterior, Victor Kozlov cared deeply about the people who worked for him, remembering names and families, quietly helping when someone faced personal hardships. And I learned something else, something that surprised me more than anything. I learned that I was beginning to care about him too. The trouble came 3 months into my stay, when the winter was at its deepest and the sun disappeared entirely for weeks at a time. We lived in perpetual night, working under artificial lights, measuring time by meals and shift changes, rather than by the position of a sun we could not see. It started with small things, equipment malfunctioning in ways that should not have been possible, shipments delayed or lost, workers getting sick with symptoms that did not match any known illness. I told myself it was coincidence, the inevitable challenges of operating in such an extreme environment. But Victor knew better. We have a problem, he told me one night, his face grim in the blue light of the computer screens. Someone inside the compound is working against us. A saboteur, I asked, unable to believe it. But everyone here believes in the mission. I have talked to them. They love this work. Most of them do, Victor agreed, but not all. I have made enemies over the years, Miss Vargas, powerful enemies who would rather see this operation destroyed than let me succeed. One of them has apparently found a way to strike at me from within. The investigation that followed was tense and paranoid. Victor brought in a security specialist, a woman named Anya, who had eyes like chips of obsidian and a way of looking at people that made them want to confess to things they had not done. She interviewed everyone in the compound, cross-referencing stories, checking backgrounds, looking for inconsistencies. I was questioned too, of course. Anya sat across from me in a small room, her gaze unwavering, and asked me questions about my past, my family, my reasons for coming here. I answered honestly, hiding nothing, and when it was over, she nodded once and said, "You are clean. But watch your back. The person we are looking for is smart, and they may try to frame someone else to take the fall. The breakthrough came a week later, and it came from an unexpected source. David, my pipeline specialist, approached me in the workshop with a troubled expression. "Elena," he said, "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to say where you heard it." I listened as he explained. One of the newer workers, a man named Peter, who had arrived just a few weeks before the problem started, had been asking strange questions. Questions about the compound's layout, the security protocols, the shipping schedules. David had thought nothing of it at first, assuming Peter was just curious about his new workplace. But the questions had become more specific, more probing, and David had started to suspect that something was wrong. I took this information to Victor, who took it to Anya. Within hours, Peter's quarters had been searched, and the evidence was found. Communications devices hidden in the lining of his clothes, codes that matched those used by one of Victor's old rivals. A detailed map of the compound with the security weaknesses highlighted in red. Peter was brought to Victor's office. I was there, standing in the corner, watching as the truth came out. Peter was not really Peter. He was an operative sent by a man named Volkov, a former associate of Victor's who had never forgiven him for leaving the organization. His mission had been simple: gather intelligence, cause disruptions, and prepare the ground for a larger attack that was coming. "An attack?" I asked, my voice sharp with fear. "What kind of attack?" Peter smiled, and there was nothing human in that smile. "Volkov is coming," he said, "with 50 men and enough firepower to level this entire compound. You thought you could escape your past, Kozlov. You thought you could build a new life out here where no one would find you. But Volkov always finds his enemies, and he always makes them pay." Victor did not flinch. He did not shout or threaten or show any of the emotion that was surely churning beneath his calm exterior. He simply nodded as if he had expected this all along. "How long?" he asked. "How long until Volkov arrives?" 3 days, Peter said. "Maybe 4 if the weather holds him up. But nothing stops Volkov when he has decided to move. Nothing." Victor dismissed everyone except me. When we were alone, he finally let the mask slip. I saw the fear in his eyes, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. 3 days, he said. 3 days to prepare for war against a force 3 times our size. "Then, we prepare," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "What do we need?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something shifted in his expression. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you not running? You could leave right now, take the plane, be back in civilization before Volkov even arrives. Why would you stay and face this?" I thought about the question. I thought about my mother, who had taught me that running from problems only made them grow larger. I thought about the people in this compound, the engineers and scientists and workers who had become my colleagues and friends over these past months. I thought about the work itself, the clean water that could change the world, the dream that was so close to becoming reality. But mostly, I thought about Victor, about the man who had built an empire of ice in the middle of nowhere, not for profit or power, but for redemption. About the way he looked at his workers with pride, the way he pushed himself harder than he pushed anyone else, the way he had trusted me with his darkest secrets when he could have simply kept me in the dark. "Because some things are worth fighting for," I said, "and because I am not going to let a man like Volkov destroy everything you have built. Everything we have built." Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and took my hand, his grip warm despite the cold that never seemed to leave this place. "Thank you, Elena," he said, and it was the first time he had used my first name. If you are watching this right now, feeling the tension build, wondering what will happen next, leave a comment saying I stood with Elena and Victor. Let me know you are here, that you are part of this story, that you care about what happens to these characters. Your comments mean everything to this channel. The next 3 days were a frenzy of preparation. Victor called a meeting of all personnel and explained the situation with brutal honesty. He offered anyone who wanted to leave safe passage out. To my surprise and to his, almost no one took the offer. These were people who had come to the edge of the world because they believed in something greater than themselves. They were not going to abandon that belief just because danger was approaching. We fortified the compound as best we could. The security team set up defensive positions, using the harsh terrain to create choke points and kill zones. The engineers, including my team, worked around the clock to weaponize the very environment that had made this place so challenging to build. We rigged the heating systems to create sudden bursts of steam that could blind and disorient attackers. We programmed the external lights to flash in patterns that would cause disorientation. We even modified the extraction equipment to create controlled collapses in the ice tunnels, allowing us to seal off sections of the compound if they were breached. Anya trained the non-security staff in basic defense, teaching scientists and workers how to use improvised weapons, how to move through the compound under attack, how to protect themselves and each other. It was surreal, watching people who had spent their lives solving equations and designing systems now learning how to fight for survival. And through it all, Victor was everywhere, checking preparations, offering encouragement, making decisions with the calm certainty of a man who had faced violence before and knew how to navigate it. I found myself watching him more than I should have, drawn to his strength, his determination, his refusal to give in to despair even when the odds seemed impossible. On the night before Volkov was expected to arrive, I found Victor on the observation deck, staring out at the frozen darkness. The aurora borealis was dancing overhead, green and purple ribbons of light that made the ice glow with otherworldly beauty. It seemed almost cruel that such magnificence could exist in a world that also contained men like Volkov. It is. Beautiful, I said, coming to stand beside him. Yes, he agreed. I have watched these lights 1,000 times and they still take my breath away. When I was a young man, running the streets of Moscow, I never imagined I would end up here. Never imagined I would find peace in a place where the cold could kill you in minutes. You found more than peace, I said. You found purpose. He turned to look at me, and in the shifting light of the aurora, his eyes were no longer storm gray. They were alive, with colors I had never seen before, green and gold and something that looked almost like hope. I found you, he said quietly. That is the part I never expected. I did not know what to say. I did not know what I felt or what I wanted to feel. So I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I stepped closer and I let him take my hand again, and we stood there together, watching the lights dance over a world that was about to change forever. Volkov's forces arrived at dawn, though dawn in this season was just a lightening of the darkness from black to deep blue. They came in a convoy of armored vehicles that should not have been able to navigate the frozen terrain, and they came with enough weapons to wage a small war. From our observation posts we counted them, 53 men heavily armed, moving with the precision of soldiers. Victor addressed us one last time before the fighting began. Remember what we are protecting, he said. Not just ourselves, not just this compound, but the future. The water beneath our feet will save lives for generations to come. That is worth fighting for. That is worth everything. The battle was nothing like the movies. It was chaos and noise and terror, punctuated by moments of eerie silence when the wind carried the sound away. Volkov's men attacked in waves, trying to breach the perimeter, and our defenders pushed them back again and again. The traps we had set worked better than we had dared hope. The steam vents erupted at precisely the right moments, scattering attackers and creating confusion. The collapsing ice tunnels sealed off breaches before they could be exploited, but Volkov had not become a power in the underworld by being easy to defeat. His men adapted, finding new approaches, new weaknesses. By midday they had breached the outer perimeter and were fighting their way toward the main buildings. I was in the command center with Victor, watching the security feeds, feeling helpless as the people I had come to care about fought for their lives. Get to the safe room, Victor said, his voice sharp with urgency. Take the essential personnel and lock yourselves in. I will hold them as long as I can. No, I said. I am not leaving you. Elena, this is not negotiable. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at me. I said I would stay and fight. I meant it. You do not get to send me away now. For a moment I thought he would argue. I thought he would physically force me to leave because he was more than capable of it. But something in my face must have convinced him, because he simply nodded. "Stay close to me," he said, "and if I tell you to run, you run. Promise me." "I promise." The final confrontation came in the main processing chamber, the heart of the Ice Empire. Volkov himself led the assault, a bear of a man with a face scarred by violence and eyes that held nothing but hate. He had once been Victor's right hand, I learned later. They had built the old empire together. Before, Victor's conscience had driven them apart. Now Volkov wanted revenge, not just on Victor, but on everything Victor had become. The fight between them was brutal and personal. They circled each other among the extraction equipment, trading blows, speaking words in Russian that I could not understand, but that carried the weight of years of history. I watched from behind a control panel, my heart in my throat, knowing that everything depended on the outcome of this battle. Victor was skilled, but Volkov was fueled by rage that gave him an almost supernatural strength. He drove Victor back step by step, until Victor's back was against one of the massive ice cores, the ancient water glowing blue behind him. Volkov raised his weapon, his face twisted with triumph. And then I acted, not with a weapon because I had none, not with strength because I was no match for either of these men, but with the only thing I had, my engineering knowledge. I sprinted to the control panel I had helped, design and entered the emergency override code. The extraction equipment roared to life, sending a surge of pressurized steam directly at Volkov. He stumbled backward, blinded, his weapon flying from his grip. Victor did not hesitate. He moved with a speed and precision that I had never seen, disarming Volkov, subduing him with moves that spoke of years of training. Within seconds, it was over. Volkov was on the ground, and Victor stood over him, breathing hard, his face bloodied, but his eyes clear. "It is finished," Victor said, and he did not deliver the killing blow. Instead, he stepped back and let his security team take Volkov into custody to face justice through channels that I did not fully understand, but that apparently existed even in this world of shadows and ice. We had won. The Ice Empire still stood. The weeks after the battle were filled with recovery and reconstruction. We mourned those we had lost, 8 brave souls who had given everything to protect the dream. Victor held a memorial service speaking of each one by name, honoring their sacrifice. I stood beside him, still not fully believing that I had survived, that any of us had survived. The world outside never learned the full truth of what happened. As far as anyone knew, a group of criminals had tried to attack a remote research station and had been repelled by security forces. The authorities asked few questions. Victor's connections apparently still extended far enough to ensure that certain investigations went nowhere. I was troubled by this at first, but I came to understand that sometimes survival required navigating gray areas. My mother had her surgery while I was still in Alaska, paid for by the first installment of my salary. It was successful. She called me, her voice weak but happy, asking when I would come home. "Soon," I told her. "But there is something I need to finish first." The something was the work itself. The attack had damaged some of our equipment, but the core operation was intact. Within a month, we were back to full production. Within 2 months, we were ahead of schedule. The first shipments of ancient water went out to buyers around the world, premium clients who paid handsomely for the purest water on Earth. The revenue flowed in, and Victor directed it not just to expansion, but to research, to technology sharing, to partnerships with universities and environmental organizations. The Ice Empire was becoming something more than a business. It was becoming a movement. And somewhere in the middle of all this, my relationship with Victor changed. It happened slowly, gradually, in small moments that accumulated until they became something undeniable. A touch that lingered too long. A look that said more than words could express. Late nights spent talking about everything and nothing, sharing our histories, our hopes, our fears. One night, as the aurora again danced overhead, Victor asked me to walk with him. We went to the same spot where we had stood before the battle, but everything was different now. The tension of impending violence was gone, replaced by a different kind of tension, one that made my heart race in an entirely different way. "Elena," Victor said, I have something to ask you. I knew what was coming. I had known for weeks, maybe longer, that we were moving toward this moment. But hearing him speak still made my breath catch. I am not a good man, Victor continued. I have done things that I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for. I cannot promise you a normal life or an easy one, but I can promise you this. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I will protect you and cherish you and love you in ways that I did not know I was capable of loving anyone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple and beautiful, with a stone that glowed the same blue as the ancient ice we mined. I had it made from the first pure crystal we extracted, he said, so that you would always carry a piece of this place with you. I did not need to think about my answer. Yes, I said. Yes, to all of it. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that moment, standing at the edge of the world, I felt like I had finally found my place in it. We were married 3 months later, in a ceremony held in the great hall of the compound. Everyone who lived and worked in the Ice Empire was there, along with my mother, who had flown in despite her doctors' protests. She wept through the entire ceremony, though whether from joy or from shock at the circumstances of her daughter's life, I could not be certain. Probably both. Victor's transformation continued. With Volkov's network dismantled and his old enemies either neutralized or converted into reluctant allies, he was finally free to pursue his vision without constantly looking over his shoulder. He began working with governments and international organizations, sharing the technology we had developed, helping to bring clean water to communities that had never had access to it before. I continued my work as lead engineer, but my role expanded. I became Victor's partner in every sense of the word, helping to shape the direction of the company, advocating for environmental responsibility and fair labor practices, ensuring that the Ice Empire lived up to its potential as a force for good in the world. We faced challenges, of course. There were times when Victor's past threatened to resurface, when old debts came due and old enemies emerged from the shadows, but we faced them together, and somehow that made all the difference. In the crucible of our struggles, something had been forged that could not be broken. 1 year after my arrival, I stood again at the edge of the compound, looking out at the frozen landscape that had become my home. My hand rested on my stomach, where a new life was growing, a child conceived in love and hope. Victor stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, his eyes filled with a peace that I had never seen there before. "We did it," I said softly. "We actually did it." "No," Victor replied. "You did it. You came here to solve an engineering problem, and instead you saved an empire. You saved me." I leaned into him, feeling his warmth against the endless cold. "We saved each other," I said. "That is how it works." The aurora was dancing again, as it did almost every night in this season, green and purple and gold, ribbons of light that stretched from horizon to horizon, nature's reminder that even in the darkest places, beauty could flourish. I watched the lights and thought about the journey that had brought me here, the desperation, the fear, the discovery, the love. I had come to the edge of the world expecting to find nothing but ice and isolation. Instead, I had found family, purpose, and a future brighter than any aurora. The cold was still there, would always be there, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a reminder of the strength that lives within us, waiting to be awakened by the right circumstances, the right people, the right love. This is the story of how a mafia boss built an ice empire in the middle of nowhere. But it is also my story, and Victor's story, and the story of everyone who chose to believe that redemption is possible, that the past does not have to define the future, that love can grow even in the coldest places on earth. If you have watched this far, it is because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying I have watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. Your support means everything to me. If you felt something during this journey, if you laughed or cried or held your breath during the battle, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a story of hope and transformation. And if you are not already subscribed, Join our community of dreamers and believers who know that, even at -85 degrees, the human heart can still find warmth. Thank you for being part of this story. Until we meet again, remember that every empire begins with a single step, and every love story begins with a single moment of courage. May you find both in your own life. The end.